Welcome to What's Your Mount Rushmore podcast with hosts Mark Duvel and John Hanson.
Are you kidding me?
Two old friends and knuckleheads discussing and covering their top four choices for any and all topics, making up their Mount Rushmore selections each week. Nothing is off limits. As you listen, remember we always want to know, what's your Mount Rushmore?
Hey. Welcome back. New episode, new topic, new times, good times. Welcome back to What's Your Mount Rushmore podcast. I'm one of the hosts. I'm Mark Duvel.
Yeah, then I'm the other guy over here on this side of the microphone, John Hanson. And welcome back again. We are happy to have all of our listeners and along for the ride. We've been doing this for quite a while, and we're going to keep on doing it. We found another fun topic. And this is something that we had talked about a while back, and, we're going to dive into it and see what everybody thinks. What we're doing today is old school wrestlers.
Oh, yeah!
See, I've come to the conclusion, truly, like just the whole concept of our podcast, what we do week to week, when you really look back at we're probably approaching somewhere around 30 episodes, give or take, at this point in the game. This really is targeted towards Gen-Xers when you really kind of break down what we've been talking about. And This topic this week is such a great example of if you grew up in the generation we did, I got to imagine that this topic kind of hits home to some degree, especially if you're from the Midwest, like you and I both clearly are.
Sure. Well, and the old school wrestler concept is different based on whatever the generation is, right? I mean, if you talk about like people older than us or our parents, they have a whole list of old school wrestlers they remember. People that younger than us might think The Rock is an old school wrestler. I'm telling you, he's not old school to me. But
no, not at all. Yeah, there's nothing like new age with that on my list.
Most of mine are from the 80s and early 90s, to be honest.
Exactly. So are mine, because that's like the heyday of when you got up, growing up in Minnesota, you would watch wrestling every Saturday morning.
Well, let me tell you something, brother.
Yes. And it was just a weekly staple to your week. And wrestling was different then. I mean, we all knew what it was. Even back then it was still is it fake or isn't it?
Well, when you're a kid, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. But again, it's changed. I only followed wrestling up until probably my early teen years, if that. I don't know. I never really got into it beyond being an adult. No. I could care less. Why don't you get things rolling here? What is your first pick on Mount Rushmore of an old school wrestler?
Well, and just to remind our listeners that we do not know each other's picks ahead of time. We always kind of guess that we might have some duplicates. My first pick, I don't think it's going to be on your list. I'm pretty sure he won't be. He was the Ultimate Warrior. You remember that guy?
Well, how could I not? He's the poster boy for steroids. That was about as muscular and veiny as a human being could be and still be able to move.
Well, ironically, that's because probably like a lot of other wrestlers, he got his start as a bodybuilder. So that is why he definitely had that sculpted, body that looked like a bodybuilder, but then he just became a wrestler. His real name was James Hellwig. He was from a small town in Indiana. I'm not even sure what the name of the town was, to be honest. But when he wrestled, they always announced that the Ultimate Warrior was from, quote unquote, parts unknown.
Yeah, that's right.
So he got his start, parts unknown. Well, he looked like honestly, he was one of those first guys. He had the long hair. He had the tribal face paint, and he had the weird things hanging off of his biceps, and everything.
Like streamers hanging off his arms always. Yeah.
He looked like a crazy person. He really did. I mean, he and his persona was that of a crazy person. And I wouldn't want to face him in the ring. I mean, his look alone would probably make you want to run away. He got his start, like a lot of wrestlers, he got his start in a regional thing down in Tennessee. His partner that he came up with in the wrestling world was Steve Borden, who you may know better as Sting. He went on to be obviously a big wrestler. So those two guys kind of came up together as partners. But It wasn't until the later 80s when he joined WWF, and then that's when he gained that national fame. I actually used to play. And I wish I was trying to remember this morning, and I should have done some research. There was an arcade game. It might have been just called Wrestlemania. I don't remember now. There was an arcade game in the late 80s, probably into the early 90s, that I would play. Not a console. I'm talking about an actual arcade game, and I always played as the Ultimate Warrior. Always.
I remember that game, and I think it might be called Wrestlemania, and if not, who cares? But I know the game you're talking about. Yeah,
you could pick your own guy. You could play tag teams against, I think you'd probably get 4 guys. You could 4 of you could be playing the game at once, and it was a blast. And yeah, the Ultimate Warrior was always my guy. He's the guy I always played, so it was an easy person for me to pick as my first choice on the Mount Rushmore. None of mine are ranked in any particular order, but he was just the one that came to my mind first. He actually legally changed his name to Warrior. So and to the point where his kids, that's even their last name. Whatever their last name, their first names are, John, Mark, Warrior is their last name.
So, oh my God! Wow.
So he blessed his kids with that, I guess. But he actually died of a heart attack about 10 years ago. Now he was only 54 years old when he died. But yeah, wow. a big part of my young wrestling fanship. But like you, I didn't really watch wrestling beyond my teen years. I'd see it once in a while, but in those younger years, that's when it was important to me. And the Ultimate Warrior was one of those.
And important it was because when I was a kid, I mean, I had all the like those big rubber. They were almost like a foot tall rubber action figures from all the WWF superstars.
Really? Wow! I never had those.
Yeah, I certainly watched. Like I said, every Saturday morning there used to be a cartoon that featured these guys. But yeah, so I'll get into my first one just while we're rolling here, and this is one that he was never really a huge. I'm not going to say he was like a huge star. But he was always one of my favorites just because of, one, how he looked, but also what his finishing end the match move was. And his name was James Wiley Smith. Now, I can't imagine you're going to grab that out of midair and go, oh, I know who you're talking about. But his performing name is Jimmy Superfly Snuka.
Oh, yeah.
And he was a badass. He was born in 1943 in Fiji, then moved to Hawaii, and he very much kind of carried that persona into his character as a wrestler. And and he, just like you were saying about Ultimate Warrior, he started as a bodybuilder in Hawaii, and he won Mr. Hawaii, Mr. Waikiki, and Mr. North Shore. Come 1982. That's when he started in the WWF, and he did 2 stints in the WWF, 82 to 85, went to some other league or whatever you want to call it, came back to the WWF from 1989 through 1993. But he would climb up on the top rope, stand straight up on it, stick his arms straight out in the air, and give the 2 arena rock symbols.
Yes.
And then he would just soar, jump off the top rope, soar through the air, land on the dude that he's about to pin, and the crowd would go wild. And again, a quick closed circuit to my brother from another mother. He was my next door neighbor, Craig Carger. He will certainly attest to this, that growing up, we certainly did our share of wrestling. And if I had to pick any wrestler's move that I tried to imitate, there wouldn't be one more than Jimmy Superfly Snuka and me jumping off little mini trampolines, even blown up inner tubes. Remember the black inner tubes like people would use on rivers and lakes? We would fill those up, and I would run, jump off one of those, and do the move and land on Craig.
And you do the rock and roll salute while you're doing it too.
Yeah. So he was just really fun to watch because of all the just midair flying through the air antics. I mean, it was so cool with his hair flopping and again, the thing about the sad reality, and I'm not going to get into it, but he had a really sad life. And that's the kind of the sad reality. Wrestlers, a lot of these guys do have dark pasts, and it is a rough life. I mean, to be a wrestler, especially this era, man, there wasn't the money that we're talking now, and it was just life on the road, a lot of injuries, probably a lot of pain-killing type drugs, and probably a lot of steroids. And
yes,
that's just the way it was. But it was all in the name of entertaining they're young crowds, and it was entertaining at its time. So
yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so my first one, Jimmy Superfly Snuka.
When I think of wrestlers, particularly the old school type wrestlers from that era, you had guys that were big guys, like the Ultimate Warrior or Jimmy Snuka. These guys that were just ripped, built, huge guys.
That's huge.
And then you had guys that were smaller that were super athletic. And you didn't have a lot of crossover, but Jimmy Superfly Snuka kind of crossed over between, because he could fly around. He was for his size, for his big, physique and his build, he could move.
He was very athletic. You're right.
Which is, so he was that. That's interesting, because I thought about him a little bit. He didn't make my list, but I thought about him a little bit as you were talking. That just kind of dawned on me that he was unique in that sense. And he's dead now too, right?
He is dead. Yeah, he died in 2017, I believe, at the age of 73.
Oh, well, he all four of my picks are passed away, and Jimmy would have outlived all of them. They all died younger than that. So at least
well, again, it's that whole, like we were just saying, they live a rough life, man.
Life they choose, obviously, but it is a rough one. But very cool. Well, I'll jump into my next one, and this is a guy everybody's going to know, and he may be on your list. He may be on a lot of people's lists. I don't know. He was born Randy Poffo in Columbus, Ohio.
I don't have him on my list, but I'm pretty sure I know who you're about to say.
The Macho Man, Randy Savage, of course.
Yeah. Snap into a Slim Jim.
Yes. I've seen, pictures pop up over the years, so I'd already knew this about him, but he played baseball when he was young, and he was a good baseball player. He was drafted actually by the St. Louis Cardinals right out of high school. He was a catcher in high school. They moved him into the outfield. He actually played 4 seasons in minor league ball, I think with the Cardinals organization, but he never rose above minor leagues, never made it to the big leagues. He actually was starting to wrestle during the baseball offseason. You don't make a lot of money as a minor league baseball player, so he probably took on jobs doing wrestling and stuff in the winters. Once he realized baseball wasn't his thing, he decided to focus on wrestling, and that became his thing. And damn good thing he did, because he was one of the most popular guys of the entire 1980s.
God, he was huge, man. And one of my first memories, when I think of Randy Macho Man Savage, I think of him, obviously, because talk about just having charisma.
Yeah.
And just commanding attention. As soon as he would get interviewed, you were going to listen, because it was insane.
Yes.
But the other thing I thought of was that just drop dead bombshell that was always with him.
Miss Elizabeth.
Miss Elizabeth.
Just out of curiosity, Randy, and I certainly don't want to diminish your tremendous God-given talents, but I'm very curious. I haven't seen Elizabeth lately.
Yeah, she's on the outside of the ring. Does she interfere in matches? Yeah. Nothing, zero, yeah. Pure athlete, yeah. And I've been, maligned from the top to the bottom. And because they can't handle the Macho Man Randy Savage, the cream of the crop. Nobody does it better.
So he joined the WWF in 1985. He actually met Miss Elizabeth in the early 80s, and they were married in 1984 in real life. They got married. So before he even joined, and they had this whole storyline about her being his manager. And then in the wrestling world, the fake, his fake world, Randy Savage, not Randy Poffo. They actually did get married. I think in like 1991, they'd already been married for like 6 or 7 years by that point in time in real life. And then ironically, they ended up getting divorced like a year after their fake wrestling marriage. They got divorced in real life. So apparently a fake marriage is a good way to end a real one.
Oh, yeah!
I guess this was the lesson that we learned there. But yeah, no, he was bigger than life and just a real character. And you talk about personalities. I chose my list based on almost exclusively based on their personalities, because I don't remember a lot of wrestling moves. All the guys on my list were guys that were larger than life personality wise. And, other than the Ultimate Warrior, the rest of the guys on my list all did things outside of wrestling, whether it was acting or commercials or sponsor, whatever. They did all kinds of stuff. Macho Man did the snap into a Slim Jim, I could still, and those commercials haven't been on the air for like 25 years, but I can still hear them, in my brain.
I still associate Slim Jim with Randy Macho Man Savage. It's funny you say that. Talk about impressions. Like that. That's good marketing.
Chips! Gotta have beef. Gotta have spice. Need a little excitement. Snap into a Slim Jim. Oh, yeah.
I always associate it with him snapping into a Slim Jim.
They should, even though he wrestled up until actually as late as 2004, if you can believe it. But he died in 2011 at the age of 58. I think I did mention that Ultimate Warrior died. He was 54 when he died. Randy Savage was only 58 when he died. So again, too young. Heart-related issues in both cases. I still, in my brain, I think of Macho Man when I think of Slim Jims. And you're right. They should make a deal with his estate somehow and bring those commercials back. Yeah, why not?
Oh, that'd be huge, man.
Yeah. I'm sure that,
again, just because of his presence and the way he yelled and talked and
yeah. Yeah. And a big part of wrestling is what happens outside of the ring, the interviews and the stuff. Speaking of interviews, quick shout out to somebody who was not a wrestler but belongs in the conversation, Mean Gene Okerlund. You got to talk about him.
I was going to bring him up because I'm going to throw something at you that if you know this, I will be blown away. One, I'm going to take this opportunity to just wedge this in to my next pick. If you're cool, moving on. From Randy.
I'm done with the Macho Man.
Okay, my next pick is Jesse the Body Ventura. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Now, a lot of reasons why, and you're right. These larger than life personalities. So I'll go back to Jesse in a second. Jesse Ventura is the wrestler who actually, or the person that gave Mean Gene Okerlund the name Mean Gene.
Really?
A little fun fact that I can't wait to get your reaction on is you and I both worked at KDWB Radio. It's where we met. Did you know that Mean Gene Okerlund once was the program director for KDWB?
No.
I read that on the World Wide Web this morning. Just because I had a feeling, I already knew, kind of the premise of what I was going to talk about my picks. But like you, I thought, who was such a staple to all of this was Mean Gene. He was the voice of it. He was kind of the face of it.
Yeah.
He did such a good job interviewing these guys and just dealing with their personalities. So I did a quick little dive on Mean Gene. And the more I read, I was like, what? He was the program director at KDWB?
When? Do you remember the years? Do you know what years that was?
I couldn't find years.
Probably 60s, maybe, I guess.
Yeah, because he's
60s,
from
70s.
He was from like Nebraska, and he moved to Minneapolis to be an on-air DJ for WDGY. Okay. And then his next job after that was program director for the KDWB that we worked at. Yeah. Who the hell knows this?
Yeah.
How did we not know that?
How did we not know that when we were working there? That would have been. We could have tried to get him back to the station.
My God, man! Like that was so random to me. It floored me this morning. I could not believe it.
Wow. Well, we got something in common with Mean Gene. I love it.
Yes. Well, and back to my pick, my second pick, Jesse the Body. Like Jesse, I also worked at KFAN. Yeah. KFAN, before he got into his politics, Jesse the Body did have a talk show on KFAM. Back then it was AM 1130. But here's, Jesse's such a dynamic, person for this reason. I mean, he was born named James George Janos in 1951.
Minneapolis, St. Paul, listen up. This is Jesse the Body Ventura talking to you from the Chicago Lake Liquor Store across from Sears in Minneapolis. Where should you turkeys go to buy your beer? Chicago Lake Liquor Store. You can get the finest in domestic beer as well as imported beer.
My pick is a little biased because I got to kind of sample Jesse the Body from both of his political platforms. I was certainly a resident in the city that he first started when he became a mayor of Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. And that was a big thing.
Oh, yeah.
Like he was literally, he won kind of in a landslide. He won to be our mayor, our elected mayor. And then we all know what happened next. That parlayed into him becoming the 38th governor of Minnesota from 1999 to 03. And he was then not Jesse the Body. He was Jesse the Gov.
Jesse the Governor. I voted for him.
I did too. And, and what's so wild is I could be wrong on this, but he's the first person from like the Reform Party. Let's maybe call it the Independent Party, but I think specifically the Reform Party. He's the only person that's ever won like a major election for a major seat on a big political level like that, like a governorship of a state.
Sure.
I mean, that was a big thing. Like, it started where everyone thought it was a joke because it was very grassroots, but he's also a badass. The dude was a Navy SEAL, and was part of the underwater demolition team as a Navy SEAL.
Jesse Ventura, for the most part, you've had your way over the past few years. There's a young man that has entered the AWA very impressively, and that is none other than the incredible Hulk Hogan, a man who I think could truly test your strength.
Oh, he'll test my strength, but the body will prevail. Mean Gene, let's talk about other stuff. I'll get to this arm wrestling. I'll get to what Hulk Hogan wants to do with the body, and that is break arms.
So he's no joke, man. Like, he's a big dude, big, strong guy. Obviously, Jesse the Body, he had the nickname for a reason because he was a big son of a bitch. And tough as nails. But to be a Navy SEAL, that proves it. You're not going to be a wee and be any position on a Navy SEAL.
No.
But then you mentioned it earlier that some of your picks went on to do things after wrestling. Obviously, he had his political career, but he was also in 2 just badass movies with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And that's clearly the first one anyone's going to think of, I promise you, is Predator. Yeah. Because he has such great catchphrases in that movie. And it's one of my favorite movies from when I was young.
Yeah, well, you mentioned his catchphrase, "I ain't got time to bleed." That was the name of his autobiography. That's how much he embraced not just that movie, but that role and that line.
Son of a bitch is dug in like an Alabama tick.
You're hit. You're bleeding, man.
I ain't got time to bleed.
Oh.
Yeah, I knew. I've known Jesse. I've been aware of him since I was a very young kid because he lived on my block.
That's
when
right.
I was a kid. I'm going to be bad with the years here. It would have been probably the early to mid 80s, I'm guessing. Yeah, I'd say mid 80s or so. He lived on my block in Minneapolis, North Minneapolis, and we would see him outside. More than one occasion with his tag team partner, Adrian Adonis. You remember him?
I do. Adrian Adonis.
I'd see them out in their driveway, and they both had their championship belts on. They would wear them like out in the street, walking in and out of the house.
Are you serious?
Oh God, yeah, I have memories of it. Absolutely, they did. They loved it. And my friend Justin Kohlberg lived right behind them, so like their houses, backed up against each other, their backyards, and Justin sort of babysat Jesse's kid, his son, like on a handful of occasions. They got to know him pretty well. And so, yeah, and I didn't really know Jesse personally like that, but Justin did. But it was just wild to see them just kind of hanging out. You'd kind of drive by. There they are in their driveway with their
belts on. Like,
yes. I don't, and this was a young Jesse way before his political career, way before any of the other, think what you will about him. He's gone a little bit crazy, but
I still love him. He can be as crazy as he wants because that's what makes him lovable, man.
He's earned it. He's earned the right to be crazy.
Yeah, hey man, he's been there, done that. You leave the man alone. But again, he's got wrestling, he's got politics, he's got movies, he's got talk shows, he's got podcasts. I mean, you name it, he's got books.
He owns his own THC company right now, I believe.
He owns his own THC company. But yeah, both those movies. His other movie that I love too, by the way, with Schwarzenegger, and they both were in 1987. So he was on a little run with Arnold, The Running Man, which was a great movie too.
Oh yeah, that is a great movie. Underrated.
On your marks, get set.
Killian,
I'll be back. Only in a rerun.
So cut. I mean, so yeah, Jesse the Body, man, especially with ties to my city I grew up in as my mayor and then became my governor. How on earth do I not put him on my Mount Rushmore as a wrestler?
Absolutely.
So there's my second pick.
My third pick, another one. This one, maybe the biggest personality of everybody on my list, which is saying something. And he was born Roderick Toombs in Saskatoon, Canada. I had to practice that. Roderick Toombs.
Again.
Yeah, no, I will not. But Roddy Piper.
The skirt. He wore the kilt.
Yes. Yeah, not skirt. Come on now. It was a kilt.
Yeah, you're right.
He's Scottish. I think he claimed to be Scottish. I think he maybe did have some, Scottish blood, but he was actually a Canadian, born and raised. But he embraced that, the bagpipes and all. And there's a lot of publications, wrestling themed publications, that have ranked him as the greatest villain or they call them heels in wrestling. He was the greatest villain of all time in wrestling history. That's what a lot of people say. He was such a great villain that people started to love him. You know, usually you kind of hate the villain. He actually kind of became a good guy at different times because people loved him so much.
Guy. The lovable bad guy, basically.
Because he was so great at being an asshole. You know?
He totally was.
He was quick-witted. He was funny. He hosted the Piper's Pit talk show, which always seemed like it ended in some kind of violence all the time. In fact, actually, you know what? You mentioned Jimmy the Superfly Snuka. He smashed a coconut over Jimmy Snuka's head once during an episode of the Piper's Pit talk show.
You know what? Oh, wait a second. Bananas and coconuts. You want to be a big shot? You know what? The only thing I didn't get a tree for you to climb up and down like a monkey, like you want to do. You want to be a big shot? I'll get you a tree next time. You want a banana? Have a banana. What do you want, man? You think? Am I making fun of you? Whoa. No, sir. No, sir. No, sir.
So,
and if I remember, and I don't have an image of him in front of me, but this just shows you how like impactful their like presentation and wardrobe is. I don't think I can think of picturing him in my head without him wearing a white t-shirt, a white red ringer t-shirt where the collar and the sleeves that have those little red strips.
Yeah.
And then didn't it across his chest, it always just said Hot Rod?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he had the red kilt that went with it.
Yes.
I think I can picture him wearing anything but that.
If anybody wanted to be Roddy Piper for Halloween, if they just did exactly what you said, there's not a single person that wouldn't recognize them immediately.
Slam dunk.
Yeah.
Not to mention, there's a free idea, everyone. If your fall is coming towards us here, that's a winner right there. That's a good Halloween costume.
That actually really is a good Halloween costume. I don't have the hair to pull it off, but that is a good Halloween costume.
Unfortunately, all your hair has been pulled off.
You dick!
Insert bald guy joke right there.
Wow. Apparently, this is a comedy podcast. We already did our stand-up comedian episode. You're trying to squeeze some more jokes in.
This is a comedy podcast?
Yeah. Well, it ain't funny.
I thought we were here to educate.
Yeah.
We're here to discuss our political views.
Yeah. Well, we did. We like Jesse the Governor.
That's as political as we'll get.
That's as political as we'll get.
Well, that's a great pick, man, because you're right. And somehow you are right about like him being a heel bad guy. But then you kind of started to like the guy because he was just cool.
Oh, he was, and he had
cool dude.
He had feuds with everybody on my list at different times. Everybody, and he had feuds with the guys that you've mentioned so far on your list too at different points. He just was always basically stirring the pot. And another reason why I love him is the movie They Live. You talk about movies. That movie is so underrated, you know, and he was the star of that movie. He did other acting, but that was the only movie that he kind of carried himself. It's a little campy, kind of cheesy at times, the movie. It's kind of his performance is over the top, which is exactly what you'd expect from not just a pro wrestler.
Movie. It's been a minute, but you're right. He was really appropriate for that role.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
Oh, that's great. He's great in it. Takes on the role of an action hero. It makes me wish he would have done more movies. It's kind of become a cult classic. So anybody that has not seen it, go back and watch it. They Live, late 80s. I think it's one of the better sci-fi action type movies from that era, actually.
So here's what's so perfect. I'm gonna transition now into my third pick because coming off of Rowdy Piper, this is such an appropriate follow-up pick. It's a pick I had to include. I had to. Because to me, he's kind of the Michael Jordan of the WWF, and I'm talking about Hulk Hogan.
Yep.
You know, born as Terry Jean Bollea, but I think it's undisputable. He was the most popular wrestler of the 1980s. You know, I think he kind of launched into a different stratosphere, the popularity of the WWF, and made like professional wrestling huge on a global scale. You know, with his Hulkamania, his appearance, again, he was just a monster. This big, tan, blonde, with the 34-inch pythons or whatever he used to say. But you know how he'd always tell kids to take their vitamins.
Train, say your prayers, eat your vitamins. Be true to yourself, true to your country. Be a real American.
He was Rowdy Piper's biggest. Those two constantly were going at it.
Yeah.
As the good versus evil, approach. And that was before Hulk Hogan eventually left the WWF, tried to do the heel thing himself.
Yeah.
I never really, again, this all happened when I had stopped paying attention at this point.
Yeah.
I think it was like the NWO and all of a sudden he went from the red and yellow, California surfer boy look to now he was, black, gray, silver, NWO. Then he dyed his beard black, so it had that whole vibe. That's not why he made my Mount Rushmore. It's more because I remember him again as a kid and Hulkamania running wild. It's like the heyday of wrestling. It's what really took it to another level. And I can't disregard this because this is a topic we have discussed on previous podcast topics. He was also in the movie Rocky III as Thunder Lips.
Yes.
When Rocky fights him in a charity fight where it's a boxer versus a wrestler.
Thunder Lips is here in the flesh, baby.
Oh my God.
The ultimate male versus the ultimate meatball.
But yeah, Hulk Hogan, I have to represent him. He's Hulk Hogan, for crying out loud. And again, I know he's had some weird life scenarios and situations, and but again, he's one of those guys. I really look at him as he kind of took wrestling to a new level. So I wanted to give him credit for that.
I did not have him on my list, but I certainly thought about him, and I knew that he belonged in the conversation. That's for sure. He would. The only reason I didn't pick him for my list is because his personality to me got a little bit annoying. I mean, even when I was a kid, I saw through some of the shit. When he'd be on the ground, and he'd kind of put his arm up, because
the crowd is giving him his energy to fight back.
Like he's feeding out the crowd, and they're like beating on him, and first he puts up an arm, and then he gets onto one knee. And then his head is down, and then his head is up, and then he's standing.
Meanwhile, guys are like whacking him across the face, and he's just kind of shaking it off. Like,
yeah, exactly.
The crowd's with me.
Yeah. Earlier they took him down with like one body slam, and now they're beating the hell out of him, and it doesn't even affect him. I don't know. Even as a 12-year-old kid, I was like, this is bullshit. Come on, what is this? So
I'll give you that. But that's wrestling in general. There's a level of corniness that's always going to exist.
And they have to play to the crowd. They have to play to the live crowd. Wrestling without the live crowd wouldn't be the same. So they have to play to that. And then the audience at home watching TV feeds off that too. I get it. It is what wrestling is. And that's probably why neither one of us have watched wrestling as adults. It's a little silly. I mean, and the funny thing is, if you watch like the Friday Night Raw or whatever the Friday night that's on every Friday live, I don't even know what it's called. But if you watch that, there are a lot of middle-aged men and women in the crowd watching. And I'm like, what are you doing there? You're spending your hard-earned money. And I'm sure those tickets aren't cheap. I'm like, I don't want to knock anybody listening who's still really, really into wrestling. I don't want to say that. It's just not for me.
It's not for me anymore. But I will say this, though, man. I do have the utmost respect for the athleticism that it takes to be a performing wrestler like these guys. I mean, I can't imagine how banged up they get week to week, day to day. I'll put it this way. Maybe this is the right way to frame it. I'm really glad it was a part of my childhood. Because it was a lot of fun to watch.
Oh, for sure.
I wouldn't change a thing for all the time that I put in watching these guys as a kid.
Since you mentioned that, just out of curiosity, at any point in time, was Sonny into wrestling?
No.
Okay.
Not at all. I mean, it's a different thing because think about it. One of the reasons that we were so into it, and all the Gen-Xers, and again, probably specifically dudes on this episode. I mean, I'm sure girls watched it too.
Sure.
But think about that. We didn't have the options that kids do now. Think about all the things that they can stream and go on their phones, tablets. They can go on YouTube. They can watch endless content. We didn't have that luxury. If you turned on the TV on Saturday morning, it was cartoons and it was wrestling.
Yeah.
Period. End of story.
Yeah.
And then when WrestleMania started and those big pay-per-views, there was nothing like that was before its time. I mean, they were like laying out and reacting to the popularity of wrestling in live time.
Even the fake staged wrestling that we know today goes back to like probably the 1930s or 40s, but it wasn't until probably the 70s and then definitely the 80s and into the 90s when it became such a big business. Like they created like an entire entertainment industry, separate from movies, separate from TV, separate from music and sports. There was wrestling. It was its own category of entertainment. And that was built and created and became such a big business. Yeah. I was just curious about Sonny, just because wrestling is pretty big still. It's
very much so. But yeah, never once got on his radar. Okay. Not that I can remember. So, right. Well, yeah, that's my third.
Go back to me then for number 4.
Is it already 4?
I've on my 4th.
Okay. Let's hear
it. Well, you haven't mentioned this guy, so I'm going to make an assumption that I thought maybe you would mention him and you haven't yet. I'm going to make an assumption that he's on your list. Just based on everybody else we've talked about, Andre the Giant.
Oh, man, of course he's on my list. He's the 8th wonder of the world.
Yeah, talk about larger than life. I mean, a lot of these guys we mentioned as being larger than life personalities. This guy, his personality was big, but he was just a big damn man. I mean, he was a larger than life human being. He was born Andre Rene Roussimoff, I think is how you pronounce it, in France.
Yeah, in France.
He had symptoms of, they call it gigantism as a kid, which, he always was a foot taller than all of his classmates, which I'm sure wasn't an easy way to grow up. But he worked on his family farm and when he was a young person in his teenagers and even in early 20s. And his brother said on the family farm, he always did the work of 3 men, and ultimately grew to, he was billed as a wrestler as being 7'4" and 520 pounds. Talk about,
I was just going to say that I have that, big, I didn't even need to look that up. I just remember it.
Yeah.
He was 7'4", 520 pounds. If you haven't, please look at, and I'm talking to you, but I'm also just talking to anybody listening. There's an HBO documentary just called The Andre the Giant. Yes. Fascinating. Yeah, it is absolutely fascinating. This guy, as beloved as he was, he really lived a cursed life because of how big he was. So he couldn't go anywhere without being recognized. Now, again, at least this was done in an era where not everyone's running around with a camera on their phone and paparazzi weren't really sweating him down like that. But he also traveled a lot because of wrestling. So, and in this HBO documentary, they really focus on how hard it was for him to travel. And this poor guy on an airplane, I mean, he'd have to sit in 2 or 3 seats and he'd fill them all. But because he was so big, he couldn't use the bathroom in the airplane. So they'd have to literally like close the curtains in first class and just have him go in a bucket. Like, just imagine, like, that's the shame that you would kind of feel. There's so much fascinating things about this guy. I mean, he was in one of my favorite movies as a child, The Princess Bride in 1987.
In Vicini, he can fuss.
Fuss. Think you like to scream at us?
Probably he means no harm.
He's very, very short on charm.
You have a great gift for rhyme.
Yes. Some of the time.
Enough of that!
Fezzik, are there rocks ahead?
If they are, we all be dead.
No more rhymes now, I mean it!
Anybody want a peanut?
Yeah!
He played the character Fezzik, the giant. But what's so funny is Carrie, is his name Carrie
Elwes.
How do you say his name?
Carrie Elwes.
Yeah, so he was the lead role in The Princess Bride. He was also in the movie Saw. But I've seen him in interviews talking about, The Princess Bride and the kind of the blockbuster that it became. People will ask him, what's one of your highlights of that movie, of making that movie? And I've seen him numerous times in different interviews talk about working with Andre the Giant, but he said there's a specific scene where they're about to like raid the castle to try to go get the princess. And Rob Reiner, who directed it, yells, all right, action. They say their lines, but then all of a sudden, Andre the Giant starts to fart. And the fart, because they can prove it, the fart lasted 16 seconds. And it shook the set. Everybody stopped. And when he was finally done, and if you watch the HBO documentary, there is literally a section of the documentary that literally covers his flatulence. And that was his calling card. Like, that was his trademark, was flatulence. Mean Gene talks about it. Vince McMahon talks about it. Hulk Hogan talks about it. And they all describe it as, when he farted, it was an event.
Andre so enjoyed flatulence. When he passed gas, it was an event.
Flatulence. That was his trademark. And he had a real knack for lifting his left leg.
It sounded like, like a deep roar kind of like thing. It would rumble.
The sound of Andre taking a fart? Well, they were loud. Big man, big fart.
You'd love to get you in an elevator and cut one of those long 30-second farts that sound like skin was flapping together. I remember every once in a while we'd charter a plane, but to see the pilots, almost like somebody gets smoke in their eyes. I'm like, you're gonna wreck the plane, Andre. You can't fart like that in your pants. And the pilots would be, GD this, F that. God, never on this plane again.
That is a great documentary. I love that documentary too. Very sad.
It is, because again of what we talked about, and he died young. I mean, he was only 46.
Yeah.
When he died. And I think that's kind of the problem when you are that big. You're going to have health issues.
True.
But the other thing that's revealed, and again, numerous stories are talked about, he could drink everybody on planet Earth under the table. And they shared numerous stories where, they can document it, where he drank 119 beers in 6 hours.
Inconceivable! I read there's many times that he drank more than 100 beers in a sitting. I mean, that was not a one-time thing.
And then there's a story when they were on the road somewhere in Pennsylvania where he had been out drinking. And again, you're well into the 100 plus beers category.
Yeah.
When he got back to the hotel, he passed out in the lobby and fell on the floor. And because he was so big, they couldn't move him. So they let him just sleep in the lobby floor until he naturally woke himself up in the morning. Because they couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah, what are they going to do? Yeah. Yeah, I read a story that Hulk Hogan claims that in a 3-hour bus ride one time between cities that he drank a case of wine, which is 12 bottles. That's just in 3 hours that he put down 12 bottles of wine. And I also read that he was notorious for getting drunk, and it took a lot to get him drunk, but he could get drunk eventually. And the NYPD, when they knew he was out on the town in New York City, they actually had a detective, or maybe even a couple of detectives that would follow him around, like a undercover detective, just following him around from bar to bar, wherever the hell he was going, because when he had a tendency to drink too much, he would fall down, and there was instances where he fell on top of people. and that'd be a deadly situation for somebody. So they actually had cops that would follow him around just in case something like that happened, that they'd have somebody right there on the spot that could try to help somebody.
It's absolutely fascinating. That is fascinating.
I gotta believe that he may be had the highest alcohol tolerance of any human being that has ever lived.
I have a feeling you're right, and it's I read this too, but it says it's like not verified, whatever that means. But like there was a moment where he had to have a surgery, but when it came to putting him out, they knew like normal what they would give you and I to put us out for a surgery wouldn't work. The part that's unverified, and maybe it's, a rumor or a urban legend about him, is that the doctors literally took advice from his friends and colleagues of, his fellow wrestlers of how much alcohol it took for him to get drunk, so that they could kind of come up with a formula of how do we get him knocked out when he's this
elephant tranquilizers.
Yeah, you're throwing a rhinoceros on an operating table. Like, what do you give him to knock him out?
Yeah.
Just fascinating. A fascinating person. But I can't plug that documentary enough because it's entertaining from start to finish. And you laugh, you get sad, but you also learn a lot about a very unique guy with a very unique life because of unique circumstances, basically.
Yeah, no, it was easy for Andre. Was going to be on my list from the very start. He had to be. He had to make my list because he was just a presence in wrestling, and he actually is. It was, I think if he were still alive, I think he'd probably be around 80 years old now. If granted, he was never meant to live to be 80 years old. That's for sure. But
yeah, he's born in 46. So
yeah, okay, so 78 then this year, I guess.
Man.
I'm not that well acquainted with you. First of all, Andre, here we have this week on Piper's Pit, of course, Andre the Giant, supposedly the biggest man in the world ever. It's a pleasure to have you. Where are you from, Andre? I'm sorry, do you speak English? Andre, where do you come from?
It's none of your business.
But even back in the 1970s, just one last thing about him, he was a big time wrestler, even in the 70s, long before all these other guys that we were talking about. And in fact, he was the highest paid wrestler in the world in the mid 70s. So he was a true old school guy from our standpoint, anyway, because he went back to the time when both of us were babies, basically. So,
well, you're right. Like the big, it was a big damn to do when Hulk Hogan body slammed him at like a WrestleMania.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that we didn't realize as kids, like he was at the very end of his career by the time he got to the WWF, because you're right. He did wrestle overseas and did a lot and was huge. And Vince McMahon finally got his hands on him. But at that point he had such big back issues. I mean, he was lumbering through these matches.
And if I remember right, he was wrestling, or at least attempting to wrestle, right up until the final years of his life, too. So it must have been a lot of pain.
That's all he knew how to do, It was that, and he would go back to his original family farm to kind of get away from everybody, to escape.
Yeah.
So that way he could go around in the little village or, the little small town in France that he came from, because there they just treated him like a person. Because the minute you leave your home, and you're not in your little city, you're Andre the Giant.
Yeah, absolutely.
The biggest wrestling star, a movie star, and one of the most recognizable humans still to this day that's ever been born. He does not have a doppelganger.
No. And nobody should try to pull off an Andre the Giant Halloween costume, because it just ain't going to work.
It's not going to fly.
It ain't going to work.
But again, this was a fun topic because, again, that's why I started by saying what a walk down, the Gen X memory road here.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and it really is. This list is a Gen X type list because you're right. People that are, let's say, 10, 20 years younger than us, they may never heard of Jimmy Snuka. They may never have heard of Roddy Piper.
Well, here, so. I wrote these down. These are not like honorable mentions. It's just because there was such a like collection of awesome names that are throwback wrestlers that I remember watching. We have to do a quick shout out, by the way, to Jumpin' Jim Brunzell, because we know his daughter. And one of our friends, Bushi, he married Jumpin' Jim's daughter. So this character gets a run around, and his father-in-law is Jumpin' Jim Brunzell from the Killer Bees.
Yeah, shout out to Bushi.
So Jumpin' Jim, you had Nick Bockwinkel, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, which, by the way, I ended up giving one of my son's friends that nickname, Hacksaw. His name's a little quick shout out to Jack Perkins. That's literally become his nickname. He's called Hacksaw, and that came from Hacksaw Jim Duggan. You got Marty Jannetty, Baron von Raschke, Wahoo McDaniel,
Ricky Steamboat,
Ricky the Dragon Steamboat.
Yes,
Junkyard Dog was awesome. That was more like later WWF years. Another quick shout out to my old, again, brother from another mother, Craig. He became a wrestler, and his wrestling name was K-Train. And I watched him wrestle in like real events at bars and clubs, and it was hilarious. It was fun to watch that stuff. Mm-hmm. And then I'll end with this story, and it's not that entertaining, but if you're from these parts, again, the Midwest, you're going to know who Vern Gagne is, because he founded and started AWA Wrestling, and that's what we were watching Saturday mornings, which then later kind of turned into a lot of those wrestlers left and went to the WWF. But Vern Gagne I met him when I was about 5 years old, and I met him once, and I only met him because I had a female cousin, much older than me, obviously. She married Vern Gagne's brother, Ed Gagne, and so I got to meet Vern at that wedding because clearly it was his brother's wedding. And Vern Vern had his son, Greg. Greg became a wrestler. In fact, he was one of the Killer Bees with Jumpin' Jim.
Definitely the Gagne family, very Minnesotan. No doubt about it. Vern and Greg.
So I don't know if that I know that does not make me related to Vern Gagne. It's but my cousin married his brother. So his brother then becomes my cousin. I don't know if that makes me anything for Vern. I don't think so.
I don't know either. All I know is that I know that Vern passed away now a few years back, but if he were still alive, I think he'd be around 100 years old. So you have a cousin who married the brother of someone who would be almost 100 years old.
Hey man, I got it. Yeah,
that's a weird stretch right there, man.
But that's the family I came from. I mean, hell, if my pops was still around, he'd be 97 years old. So I mean, I grew up around a lot of people that were a lot older than me, especially on my dad's side of the family. Fun topic, wrestlers. Thanks for the memories. Thanks for listening. Make sure you follow us on our socials. Give us yours because, again, look at all the names I just rattled off, and that's not even close to all of them. So share who are your Mount Rushmore wrestlers.
And not The Rock. Nobody mentioned The Rock. That doesn't count.
No, not John Cena, not The Rock.
No.
Well, I guess that's all. Kurt Angle, maybe. He was kind of a newer age guy. I literally don't know many of them.
I don't think Kurt Angle is a modern wrestler. I don't
know that. I was done well before he even became a thing.
Yeah.
So make sure you share it. Thanks for listening. You got anything else?
No.
You want to talk about your wrestling? You got your tights on when you did this?
I did. Absolutely. Got to get into the mood.
Your tall boots and your tights?
Yes, I am. I got my giant Macho Man Savage glasses on.
Well, and I would like to thank, thanks for listening, and especially thanks for listening, Daniel Michelson's Big Ears. Hope you gave it a listen. See you.